All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar today. This is To Infinity and Beyond SBOM Generation for Continuous Security and Compliance. My name is Nicole. I'll be the moderator today. And leading today's discussion, we have Larry Pesce with us. And Larry's a Product Security Research and Analysis Director at Finite State. We are so glad that he's here to deliver the presentation today. Just wanted to share a few housekeeping notes as people start to flow in. I see we have a lot of participants joining. Before we get started with the presentation, I'll just ask or let people know you can ask questions anytime using the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom panel there. We'll try to get to questions kind of in the moment as um, Larry is covering certain topics and those questions, related questions come in. And then we also have some time at the end and we'll try to address as many of them as we can. So if you think of the question, go ahead and put it there and we'll work it in. Also, this webinar is being recorded. We will send a copy of the video and the slides to anyone who's registered so you can revisit the insights and you can also share them with your team if you'd like to. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Larry so that we can get started.
Awesome. Thanks, Nicole. So yeah, as Nicole mentioned, definitely I am monitoring for questions. So if you've got a question, get it in, right? Strike while the moment is hot, and I'm going to try to keep my eye on those. So if we can work an answer into the discussion, that's great. If not, we may push some of them to the end if we have a whole bunch of questions. But also, get them in whenever. It's also a good opportunity that even maybe we step back a little bit and review something to answer one of those questions before we go further. So I'm happy to be very dynamic about how we're going to go through today's webinar. So and love the interaction. So awesome. All right, so let's get to infinity and beyond, and had some great inspiration. You'll note throughout this presentation, dirty little secret. Larry actually considered going to art school in a different arc timeline. And didn't. So I never got a chance to develop a lot of those art skills. I'm really an amateur. But for me, AI has really given me some vision into some of the art that I'd always wanted to be able to create by just asking questions and iterating through various sets of art. So you will see that I have created a whole bunch of AI generated art around our theme for To Infinity and Beyond, arguably coming out of some of the Toy Story, Buzz Lightyear story, and so forth. So let's get to it. So a little bit about me. Larry, why are you here talking to me about SBOMs and how we can use those into infinity and beyond? Um, so Nicole, great introduction, and it was very interesting because the title has changed in the last couple of days here. Um, and I had to be careful about putting this into the presentation because there were some things that I knew that not everybody in the company did. So I've been recently promoted to Vice President of Services, where now being a reformed penetration tester is actually a really good thing. And I say reformed penetration tester, and I should probably cross out reformed there. I spent nearly 20 years as a penetration tester across a whole host of industries and networks and devices and so forth, and spent the last 10 of those or so into the embedded device space, whether that was IT, OT, ICS, consumer electronics, you name it. And came to work for Finite State to go do product security, software security, software supply chain security, and so forth, but came back into doing pen testing at Finite State and now leading our services organization. So come from a little bit of that background. On some of that, more of that background, I have been the co-host of the Paul's Security Weekly podcast for 19 years. We're approaching our 20th year. It's a weekly podcast where we discuss security news over the past week and how organizations should consider some of those things that are in these news stories. And we record that weekly. We also bring in various folks from industry to talk about their projects and some of the things that they're working on and share some of their expertise with the community as well. I hold a bunch of certifications from, largely from SANS, but I'm also a principal instructor and courseware author at SANS as well. My specific areas of focus there are around wireless security and penetration testing across a whole host of wireless protocols, as well as the author and instructor for the Internet of Things penetration testing class. I used to make the joke that I was a recent convert to the Oxford comma, but I've been using that shtick for so long that it's no longer recent. So instead, for that fun little fact about me, that I am an amateur extra class or radio operator, and I enjoy long walks on the beach, with my ham radio as well. All right, enough about me. You want to hear about SBOMs, right? So here's what we're gonna cover in the webcast. We're gonna introduce sort of what software bill of materials look like. Quick introduction. But we're then going to go through and talk about the changing sort of security landscape and why SBOMs can potentially be helpful beyond maybe just some of their initial purpose. Okay, so we've got our introduction out of the way. You heard about me. We're going to talk about the landscape. We're then going to talk about those SBOMs, the infinity part, and then we're going to expand how SBOMs can really help your security programs in a bunch of different ways, and that's the beyond part. And then we'll wrap it up with some final thoughts and some questions as well. Okay. Now, the one thing that drives me nuts about AI art, they don't have text down quite well. As part of the prompt here for Buzz, the phrase was in there, to infinity and beyond. And yeah, two is not. I have no idea what two is there. And infinity has a couple too many eyes in it. And yeah, that'll be like, to me, that'll be amazing when we start getting some of that stuff right and not have to use Photoshop afterwards. So, yeah, let's can't wait for that to get better. One too many slides here, I think. All right. So, SBOMs have really become a big part of some of our regulatory landscape that we have been seeing evolve over time. Some things that have come to pass in the last 2 years, and things that are moving into the future. And I have to thank Dr. Amit Elazari and Greenwald. I stole their slide from one of their recent presentations, but it was because it is really applicable to understanding how having some of our SBOMs can improve our security practices and why we need to consider improving some of our security practices and our programs. One of those being that the regulatory landscape is having a demand for software bill of materials directly. But there are a number of ways in which software bill of materials can support a whole host of other activities when applied correctly. And that's sort of where the meat of today is. Okay. So to start us out, one of the big ones that has been, forefront of sort of our industry is the EU's Resiliency Act, or the CRA, which is just been, ratified, signed, however you want to refer to it, with the start for initial implementation, starting enforcement into 2026, and final implementation into 2027. So a phased sort of approach to being able to accomplish many of the requirements in the Cyber Resiliency Act. And of the key components there, that they want some secure by design applications. So we're building in security from the start. I've been saying this for years that it would be a great thing to do. There now we have some regulations to make that happen. They want to know product inventory with software bill of materials, and the ability to do ongoing knowledge about the security of the connected products that are going into the marketplace, and how we address some of those issues. So continuous monitoring, risk assessments, after monitoring after it has made it to the marketplace, and managing vulnerabilities as time goes on, because the industry and the landscape of security changes. Another one, specifically here in the United States, the Executive Order 14028, which has been around now for a couple of years, effectively requiring software bill of materials for devices being sold into the federal space, and creating some baselines for cybersecurity, incident reporting, and so forth. And we'll start to see, one, clearly software bill of materials is a key item there, but we'll see how we can start leveraging that for meeting some of those other demands. Okay. And then another one, as a consumer of devices, as a as a consumer, buying all sorts of connected products, whether they be light bulbs or home security cameras and so forth. Excuse me. One that is interesting to me is the Federal Communication Commission's Cyber Trust Mark program for voluntarily labeling your devices to um, uh, to have the ability for transparency into the consumer marketplace over time, with some continuous evolution of effectively a risk score of the device that the consumer is purchasing. Apologies for the little blip there. My screen in Zoom all of a sudden changed. It's because we got our first question. So I'm definitely want to think about this one, about if we had to pick one top reason to have an SBOM generator published, what would it be? Transparency or security? I think I want to address that in line a little bit further. Um, and I think we might get a roundabout answer to that as we move through the presentation. But I will definitely make sure that I do address that. So let's leave that one open for now. All right. So not only is the regulatory landscape changing, the security landscape is changing. Every day we have new vulnerabilities present. We have new challenges that we need to deal with. We have new threat actors into the environment. We have new threat actors with different motivations and targeting different areas, and new methods of attack. And over and over again, we have seen in the industry that things evolve and nothing stays the same. And two big ones that are sort of happening right now, that while may not be brand new, but leverage some of the things that we've been talking about in the security industry for some time. Um, one of them being Volt Typhoon, specifically sort of focusing on the Volt Typhoon as opposed to the Salt Typhoon. They're compromising internet-facing devices with some known and some new vulnerabilities for devices that are unpatched. So some of the known vulnerabilities, potentially known vulnerabilities against devices that have been misconfigured by the implementers to gain access to networks with some interesting consequences. One that we actually discussed on the Security Weekly podcast last night was around access to critical infrastructure. Some of the mobile operator networks, and that the threat actors were, and I'm saying allegedly because I have no physical proof, but that's what we're being told. That the threat actors were using the functionality of systems that they were able to gain access to perform information gathering, wiretapping, and some of those types of things. Because of some of these devices employed in these networks that were subject to attack that maybe we weren't taking as much stock as we should have. Hey, another one that I think was really fascinating was the one also known as Pacific Rim. Now, they're not a specific threat actor named like Volt Typhoon, but the Pacific Rim was sort of this concept around some attacks against Sophos firewall devices. And that the way we started to see some of these issues with the Sophos firewall stuff was that the adversaries were buying the Sophos products just like anybody else, and they were putting them in their lab, and were developing their attacks against legitimate devices that they had purchased, just like anyone else would, and arguably that's how I'd go about doing that. Hey, the one that I think was absolutely fascinating is that the security landscape had really sort of changed in that Sophos noted that they had some devices that were going into some questionable areas, and they developed some technology, some effectively a rootkit for devices in specific areas that gathered a whole lot more information about how those systems were being used, their faults, and so forth. And then Sophos was collecting that data. Specifically, they were collecting data from devices that were owned by the threat actors, and that the threat actors were using to develop their attacks. So Sophos was getting all of this data about the attacks before they were even being used, and had the ability to interact with the devices, figure out what they were doing, and issue patches for vulnerabilities effectively before the vulnerabilities even were used to be exploited. So I thought that was a pretty interesting and a novel way to do some of that. All right, so let's talk about how SBOMs can start to help us down all of these stuff. And I really had to do bad things to this meme, because I think it feels like that if we take a basic SBOM, it really becomes about inventory of our software components that are being used on our devices. And we've talked about inventory as a security industry for a really long time. And that's like setting the base, setting the bar really low here is asset inventory. And I think when we start thinking about a traditional sort of enterprise computing network, that knowing what is on our network is really important. Which computer is under Larry's desk, how many network switches are in that closet, which cables are connected to where, is really one of the basic things that is the root of all of our problems, is not knowing what's there. And I think that's really where software bill of materials helps us build that software inventory specifically when we start talking about code as part of our software development lifecycle, as part of our CI/CD pipeline. You know, inventory the components that we are using, our libraries at time of development. We know what's in it. So when we know that there are potentially new vulnerabilities available, that we can go and address the portions of the code and the portions of the libraries within our own development. Now, as part of manufacturing, developing our own stuff, we don't always have the source code. Uh, we very much are receiving stuff from others. Specifically, I think about like a consumer router that maybe that consumer router is based on some open source software for its operating system. That is potentially a third party. Maybe we don't have access to all of that source code, or as it's being provided to us, we don't have access to the source code and any changes that have been made. So that's where taking some binaries from those third parties outside of what we develop up on above and beyond and on top of that uh, really also becomes essential for doing the reverse engineering of the binaries to figure out what components that they had been constructed on, so that we can build a holistic picture of our devices as they're being deployed by either us or our customers. And we to the meme, what's the root of all of our problems? Asset inventory, and in this case, software supply chain inventory. Like this here, the inventory with a software bill of materials is and I'm saying classic, but the classic log4j problem. If we had an SBOM for all of our software across our organization, that asset inventory, if you will, and the log4j thing came out, and it's that time of year because it was right around our holiday season when that happened and ruined so many people's holidays because they didn't know which products and where log4j was being used in their environment. Aside from the fact that they could tie that to a particular vulnerability, they had no idea in many cases where log4j was being used, either as a developer, device manufacturer, or as someone that was putting these into their network. So having that inventory would have been really great. But this really isn't the beyond part, right? This is uh, this is the infinity part. We get a lot of data on our software inventory, and I'd argue that that's useful for something like Log4j, but with some additional data around our software bill of materials, it can be much more valuable to an organization's security posture program, whether you're in manufacturing, you're building devices, you're creating software for devices, or you're using them as a consumer in your networks, whether that's in an enterprise or in your home or you name it. So that's really where an enriched asset inventory, SBOM, is the key to the beyond part. And when we talk enriched asset inventory, I'm specifically talking a software bill of materials, the list of all the software components in our product, and enriching those with stuff like VEX, VDR, and threat intelligence. Uh, Specifically, let's say we have our asset inventory, our SBOM of one of our products, and it contains SSH, and I'm just throwing a component out there. It contains SSH of version 1. Throwing numbers out there. Uh, Now that we know that we have SSH version 1, we can compare that via CPE to known vulnerabilities. And we can match SSH version 1 to known vulnerabilities and have that enrichment of, oh, hey, we're using this, and it's subject to all of these known vulnerabilities, some of them low, some of them medium. Oh, those are scored like 9.8 CVSS. Maybe we should consider some changes to our process to not use that library anymore. Okay, so uh, having that data gives us the ability to have some better capabilities for risk decisions and prioritization. So one, knowing that there are potential impacts to the software that is in our products or that we are using is the step one for that enrichment. Okay? Um, also, taking that vulnerability data, the known vulnerability data, and tying that to threat intelligence. Is there exploit code available for that? Is it being exploited in the wild? Is it being used by specific threat actors? Is it weaponized? Are there tool sets out there that you can use? Is it in Metasploit? That's like your your low bar there. How easy is it for an adversary to exploit those types of things, to give us some priorities? And we're going to see that enriched SBOM is really what becomes key to the beyond part. All right, so let's talk about some of the places where we can use software bill of materials to the beyond part. And I'm going to sound maybe a little bit like a broken record, and we're going to, see a lot of the same sort of use cases for enriched software bill of materials across a whole host of potential capabilities, information, and so forth. So starting maybe right at the beginning, like going into the secure by design principles here. So you can use software bill of materials to start enhancing your secure by design principles as part of your CI/CD pipeline. Um, as you're developing, you can use that enriched SBOM to get real-time vulnerability, visibility into the components that are using during your build and design phase, so that we can now resolve those before it even makes it further down the chain as part of our development lifecycle. It would be a shame to have a product that we are cutting the gold firmware to be distributed to the marketplace, and find out that there are a bunch of vulnerabilities in it because we didn't consider that early on, and so many times that we have found that happening. But we're moving that, we're shifting left to start doing that earlier in the process. And our software bill of materials can really help that with that enrichment at the time of our development. Also, we can start leveraging these SBOMs in that sort of proactive vulnerability management to help us consider that maybe there should be some changes in how we're architecting any of our products, and by leveraging some of that threat intelligence and the types of things that we're seeing targeted based on what we're choosing to implement. And I think sort of at the end of the secure by design problem uh, issues application, that with those enriched software build materials, looking at what components we're using to initially build our products or any of our applications, we can do this in a circular fashion and prioritize what we need to fix. Yeah, maybe we've got some stuff in there that there's some things present. It's arguably considered a low. It's difficult to exploit. Knowing maybe some balance with something like EPSS. Um, there's no current threat actors leveraging this, and in fact, there's no proof of concept code. It's very sort of more of an academic exercise. It might be difficult to exploit. Maybe we should put that as a lower priority for us to fix, so that we're now improving our process as part of that development life cycle to give us some priorities about what we should be fixing in that iterative process. All right, so where else? Hey, right? Uh, Proactive vulnerability management. Hey, vulnerability management. Yeah, and I think this one becomes a sort of a broader broader scope than just our development lifecycle. As an organization that deploys a bunch of embedded devices, systems on a network, um, I think this one is sort of sees to the question we have earlier about the top reason, transparency or security. And I think this is a little bit of both. That I would love some transparency from my vendors to receive an SBOM, maybe having doing the enrichment myself as a consumer so that I can see what these products are vulnerable. I can start to see their commitment to security about how often they're doing updates and patches to address the same problems that I need to look at. Right. So from a development perspective, yeah, absolutely as part of your development life cycle. But as a consumer, I'd love to see that. And then I can enrich an SBOM and make those same sort of informed risk decisions and have a priority about what I need to fix and potentially how. Do I change firewall rules? Do I take a bunch of devices and I move them to a separate VLAN with a separate set of rules and separate set of access controls? Or maybe I even need to press the vendor for some patches or to press them to have some other workarounds or invent some on my own, or potentially come up with other avenues for risk mitigation. Maybe it's this was now the straw that broke the camel's back, and it's time to retire those altogether and push a project forward to make those happen. So the ability to have some risk prioritization in an overall vulnerability management program for our organizations for the devices that we consume and the devices that we use in the environment. So to this one, I think this one is a little bit of both security and transparency. It's a little bit of both as to which side of the fence you're on here, I think. All right, some other ones. um, uh, as a disciple of the IT security landscape, I've always been a fan of the thoughts of offense informing defense. The attackers, the adversaries, they only need to get it right once, and the defenders, they need to get it right every time. you know, as an adversary, as an attacker, I just need one exploit to get in, and then it's done. But on the defender side, we need to know about a whole host of exploits and methods and you name it. So I think the point being here is leveraging a software bill of materials in an adversarial scenario. Provide them to your penetration testers. Leverage enriched SBOMs to go through your environment to figure out which devices have the highest risk. That they now may be the devices that you want to target for various threat modeling, attack simulation, and so forth. Also, depending on where you are too, you may want to consider leveraging some of this type of stuff for attack paths. If we have the ability to get onto one device, how can we leverage this one device to pivot into other high-risk devices for lateral movement? So having enriched SBOMs across many devices starts helping us build some priority for resolution, how quickly we patch. Are the patch mitigations that we are doing, the timelines, are they effective at reducing overall risk, looking at some of that combined activity? Okay. And sort of finally, understanding what the overall attack surface in our organization looks like. by leveraging those enriched SBOMs to give us that holistic view of things in our environment, to come up with some ideas about where we need to focus and potentially even some of the things that we can do to improve that. Are they network-based attacks? Are they password-based? Should we consider more logging based on the individual type of stuffs here? And I'll a little aside here. I'll apologize if you get to hear a little bit of background noise. That it's the holiday season and packages get delivered. Well, my dog hates the mailman, so I think we just got some packages delivered. So the dog is having a lot of fun out in the front hallway. So apologies. Tis the season, right? All right. Where's some of our next ones? And I think we're starting to tie a lot of these together. When we started talking about um, offense informs defense, we can now start going into the defensive posture by using software bill of materials to practice defense in depth. Take what we've learned from our offense informing defense, or just using them in a defensive posture. Enriched SBOMs gives us the ability to prioritize what we should be defending. Hey, where there are interconnected components, and giving us more data to come up with a risk-based posture based on more data, on actual data for the devices themselves about how vulnerable they are, by just looking at some documentation. Okay. Giving us the ability to round out what some of our protection strategies should look like. How deep are we really going to go with some of our devices and some of our components in our environment? I think about taking ICS devices and putting those on specific networks, and how we get to those individual networks to be able to manage or get data from them, and what some of those data flows look like. And maybe some of these devices in that type of scenario maybe should have other couples of layers of firewalls and other network restrictions between them, based on the data that we are finding for the vulnerabilities from this type of stuff. So uh, this has sort of been a little bit of where some of my talk at RSAC came out last year. Was SBOMs for evil. By taking an adversarial approach to a software bill of materials to determine attack paths, attack vectors, ultimately so that we could use a software bill of materials to build better defenses. And being able to practice defense in depth by making good informed decisions with all of the data that we can possibly use. All right, moving along here, and to our question earlier on, um, you know, transparency is amazing for having an SBOM available to our customers, and I see this as a little bit of a two-pronged approach, a little bit. As someone that would potentially be publishing software bill of materials, I'd want to be using them in that iterative sort of adversarial scenario, using software bill of materials for evil to improve my own products right from the beginning of our development, right up until the end, and doing continuous vulnerability management, because the components in the device may stay static as long as they work, but the threat landscape changes. New CVEs, new components come out. New exploits come out. But now we can continue to match those over time, and that I can continue to improve my process in an iterative fashion, even after the development lifecycle has happened. And I can now start to prove to my customers, and I can start to prove to people that may be interested in my product, that my company, because we are now doing these types of activities, leveraging enriched software bill of materials to improve the process right from the get-go, all the way down, and in an iterative fashion as the landscape is changing, that we are taking security seriously, in that we are continuing to keep an eye on the threat landscape. We're continuing to make improvements based on the changes in the threat landscape, and that we're really doing our due diligence. And hopefully that will start to enable more informed purchase decisions for our consumers. Now, as a consumer, I think the cyber trust mark thing is really an interesting concept, and I hope it really takes off, because I can start to go right into a store and or a retailer, or work with my distributors and so forth, to get an idea about the overall level of security of the product through that program, to maybe change the way I want to implement devices in my environment, and which ones I'm actually selecting. And you have it being part of your purchase process. I think about a bake-off that I did many, many years ago for some networking gear, and there were a couple of things that we considered. One, usability, features, and cost. Uh, I think now we can start adding, another metric to some of those bake-offs of their security and the company's commitment to security through something like transparency. So supporting the accountability and the continuous improvement here. Now, while Cyber Trustmark is that voluntary program that is something that is there that we can start to use, I think it really just becomes a carrot for everyone to start doing the same sort of things, and start to have more transparency in the marketplace about the overall level of commitments. As if we think about now having to add a new metric into our product selection criteria, usability, features, and cost, and adding support to security and the overall security of the devices at the time we're evaluating, and seeing that over time. I really hope that this is going to start affecting our decisions, both as an average consumer, and an enterprise purchaser, and so forth. So a little bit of a two-way sort of street here. All right. So questions, feel free to get them in, because we do have a little bit of time here left for some questions if you've had them. I do have that sort of one that is outstanding that I think that I do want to make sure that I sort of catch here in sort of the wrapping up stage. Okay. So to think about the larger high level portions of the concepts here, software bill of materials are great. Yes, but a software bill of materials on its own only tells us about our inventory. It doesn't tell us how the inventory can be abused, how we should protect it, and set any sort of priorities for fixing. It's great for the inventory when we have something like Log4j happen, that we know now all the things that we potentially need to target for resolution. But using that in the beyond part, the beyond part is really dependent on that enrichment, and is key to having good data to inform a lot of those other processes. Okay. It then comes down to, how do we interpret that data? You actually need to go use it, and then apply that data to the processes. Okay. Apparently, my spell check didn't fail on some of that too. Okay. So having the data is not just enough. You actually have to use it, and to me, this is where using that as part of a vulnerability management program, as part of your secure development lifecycle, providing software bill of materials to your penetration testers, give them the data to allow them to help figure out where to target and what to fix with priority. Yeah, give them the data. Be transparent. Give them the data to make more informed decisions. So taking the data and actually using it. Okay. Now, uh, ultimately, the software bill of materials is not going to solve our problems. It's on us to do some work, and in order to do that work, we need um, tools to do that work. And I think the software bill of material becomes yet another tool in the toolbox. And I'm saying tool in the toolbox, but what I really think it is another tool supporting the toolbox, because we're going to have all sorts of other parts of vulnerability management programs and our development lifecycle and our defense in depth practices and our transparency. And I think software bill of materials with its enriched data and how we can interpret that can support all of those other decisions and all of those other tools that we already have in our toolbox to make our decisions better and more informed. So it's definitely a tool, but I think that tool can also help. To give a strange example here, I watch a lot of education type stuff. YouTube University is great about mechanics and auto repair and that type of stuff. You've got your tool in the toolbox, and it's that socket wrench. But what happens when you've got that really tough problem you need to solve, and that socket wrench just isn't long enough, and you need to add some additional leverage to that with a breaker bar. And I think adding some additional leverage with that breaker bar is like an enriched software bill of materials. All right, lots of awesome questions here. All right, so to answer our first question here, if I had to pick one for software build materials generated, published, transparency or security or any other reason, um, I personally, if we sort of had to pick there, I think security is the best one. And I may be running counterintuitive to a lot of folks saying, well, Larry, we don't want to publish our software build materials because everybody will know what's in it and we know what we're vulnerable to. Perfect. Fix it. Take some commitment, have that transparency that you are making some of those commitments to the security, and enable your consumers to make better, more informed risk decisions. As a consumer, it becomes about using a software bill of material for some security there. So, um, if I had to pick one, it would be security. But I think really, it would be me leveraging it for security, which comes out of transparency. So I think it depends a little bit, sort of where you fit into that ecosystem. All right. What are some good methods to integrate and automate generation of SBOMs and vulnerability matching scanning? Well, Scott, you almost set me up for a super softball question here because you're here on a finite state webinar. Uh, I personally think that some great methods for doing that integration is finite state. We can generate SBOMs from source code as part of our merge base acquisition, as well as doing the reverse engineering of the binaries to do those SBOMs as well. But we can also import data from a whole host of other tools to start doing a single pane of glass view. Yeah, I know the buzzwords, right? But we can also import software bill of materials. And we can perform enrichment on those software bill of materials, just like so doing automation of those software bill of materials for the CPE and vulnerability management and threat intelligence. And we update that data daily. So while the landscape is changing, we are taking into account that landscape changing and can update those software bill of materials enrichment sort of retroactively. So you have a continuous view into those devices. Okay. All right. For an anonymous attendee, can we know the source or origin of the components, such as the country of origin too? And yeah, this is um, an interesting sort of challenge, and it's a challenge that the entire security industry has right now about what you might refer to as code provenance. This is not an easy problem to solve. I think about, in some industries here in the U.S., such as and some legal entities and government agencies like Department of Commerce, they want they're talking about assurance of no code from specific political regions in products that are being used in certain industries, automotive, critical infrastructure, and so forth. Um, the challenge that you've got here is that, okay, that product uses, let's say, three open source libraries. Great. Uh, Open source libraries, we can go to GitHub and we can get that. Well, how many people contributed to that open source library? Let's say five. Where are those five people located? Maybe they're all in the U.S. Maybe three of them are in the U.S. Two are, in Russia, and maybe one of them's in Africa. That math didn't work. That was six. Where are those people located? In many cases, you don't have any idea. Well, okay. Well, now let's just track where those commits came from via IP address. That doesn't necessarily work. We have stuff like Tor anonymization that those could be committed over. We have stuff like VPNs. People use VPNs for watching TV that's only available in certain countries all the time. There's no reason we couldn't use that for doing code commits. Heck, go do our code commits and our code development at an AWS instance in a completely different region from where we exist. So, tying it via some of those methods starts to become really, really hard. And there's lots more threat intelligence that goes into something like that. So a really hard problem to solve, and I don't think we have a really good answer to that one right now. All right, let's see here. I'm going to skip over to Harish's question here. Are there any standalone SBOM tools? Yes, absolutely. There are a number of tools from the folks that have sort of the two best standards from both SPDX and Cyclone DX. If you go check out some of their GitHub repositories, they do have some standalone tools for generating software bill of materials. They're free, they're open source, but there's some value to those, but moving those into some of those enrichment stages becomes harder. Also, those tools are typically focused on source code and source code alone. Yep. SPDX is one, and Cyclone DX being the other for the two software bill of materials formats or standards. um, So, yep, you got that absolutely correct. Now, they are typically working on source code and source code alone. The challenge really becomes when you start getting into the binary reverse engineering and so forth. And there are no tools that I am aware of that do, any of the job or any good of the job for doing sort of that binary analysis, and or some of that enrichment. The enrichment can be fairly limited there. But yeah, there are some other tools out there as well. All right, Ray's got a really interesting question. Yeah, they should work for C and C++. Yep, that is typically one of the big ones there. So yes. All right. So let's see. The underlying theme seems to be counter intel tools need to be built into everything going forward, i.e., Sophos. don't these need state-sponsored level organizations to have the slightest chance to compete against the foreign state actor? Um, yeah, Finite State has 15 million in funding. It's a $15 billion problem. Sounds like it's impossible task in U.S. open society capitalism, and yeah, there's lots in this question, and I don't know that I have answers to all of these. Um, I personally don't think that the big underlying theme here is that we need to have counterintelligence tools built into everything going forward. Um, would it be really neat and would it be really cool? Yeah. Um, but I think it's probably just going to become. And so what Sophos did, that we talked about in the beginning there, I think that was pretty novel and interesting. Um, and I really think that their lawyers had a field day with allowing some of that type of stuff to happen. Um, and quite honestly, we did Security Weekly podcast last night, and we had a great lawyer, and we posed that question to him. Um, like, how did they get away with this type of stuff? And it was arguably completely legal, but it also comes down to what type of level of risk that you're willing to accept, similar to this type of things that we're willing to accept for our devices. Okay. Um, so I'm not sure about some of the rest of it is about. Is it still a $15 billion problem? I think those are some big questions. But I think to maybe address some of that overall, that it's a problem. And I think we need much better insight into security posture through transparency so that we can make better risk decisions. And I think that's one of the things that I really want to get across is that we need to be getting more information. We need to be getting more data. And I'm positioned at a place that does software supply chain security, and so let's leverage that data as part of making better informed risk decisions, regardless of sort of where we're sitting here. And it's about having data. No. As far as digging into some of the other stuff, I think that probably is a much longer discussion, and I think I'd need to actually dig into that a little bit more. So, Ray, I'd love to follow up with you some more, and potentially have another offline discussion. About some of that stuff. So thank you for the question, and it's going to make me think a little bit. I make the joke that whenever I go to teach that, you're here to learn from me, but I learn so much from the participants as well. And I think this is a great case for me to do some more learning and some more diving into some of the concern from folks that are in the trenches. So I appreciate it. All right. So, we kind of hit the questions already. I maybe got a little bit ahead of myself into the question slide. I had to prompt my AI generation art tools a number of times to get something that I really liked here. I wanted Buzz Lightyear in the thinker pose. So it's kind of what we got. Okay. Well, we're no more sort of questions coming in here in addition, and we're coming close to our time here. So I think it's sort of time to wrap us up. And I wanted to say thank you very much. Uh, and using some of that AI generated art, provided my headshot that you saw earlier in this, and told AI to make that guy into Buzz Lightyear, and this one was pretty good. So yeah, some of them were awful, and this is why being able to do art so fast and so iterative to me is amazing. So Awesome. Thank you so much for coming and spending some time with you. I know, getting towards the at the end of the year, your schedules are probably really busy, but both between, family and getting to spend some time with family and engagement, and just rounding out all of those projects at the end of the year before your potentially your budget closes, and that deadline towards the end of the year. So I appreciate you all coming and taking some time and spending it with me, in what could be considered one of the busiest times of our year. So thank you very much. Enjoy, and we'll see you on the next one.
Thank you all, and thank you, Larry. And just a quick reminder, we'll send the recording of the webinar and the slides out to all who registered, so you can just keep an eye out in your inbox for that. And if you would like to dive deeper into how Finite State can help you with your SBOM strategy, please feel free to reach out. Larry's email address is right there on the screen. You can also visit our website at finitestate.io. And on behalf of Larry and the Finite State team, thank you again for joining us, and have a great day. Thank you.